PATV presents Live from Prairie Lights, featuring the best authors and poets on the scene today. From up-and-coming to well-established writers from across the globe. You'll see them right here on PATV.
My name is Christopher Merrill, and as the director of the International Writing Program, it is my honor to welcome you to this reading by Hisham Matar, who is in residence this week as an Ida Cordelia Beam Distinguished Visiting Professor. I'm very grateful to Jan Weissmiller and her staff here at Prairie Lights for making this space available for this reading, to the committee that chose Mr. Matar, and to our co-sponsors, the Writers' Workshop, the UI Center for Human Rights, the Nonfiction Writing Program, and the Undergraduate Certificate in Writing Program. It is not often that the timing of an Ida Beam professorship coincides with breaking news in the recipient's very field. And no, I do not mean Mr. Matar's tax burden or the publication of topless photos of the Duchess of Cambridge, though it is perhaps worth noting that while he calls himself a Libyan writer, Mr. Matar holds dual citizenship in the United States and the United Kingdom, which gives him a stake in the other two stories of the day. What I am referring to, rather, is the tragic killing of the U.S. ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, and 3 members of his staff, a subject about which Mr. Matar has just written for The New Yorker. Born in New York City, raised in Libya, Kenya, Cairo, and England, Mr. Matar inhabits multiple imaginative spaces, all defined to a degree by the fact that his father, a prominent dissident, was kidnapped by agents working for the Libyan government. His fate remains a terrible mystery. Quite apart from his creative work, Mr. Matar has waged a campaign to discover the truth about his father's fate, becoming in the process a vital interpreter of his homeland for audiences in the West. The 2011 Arab Spring, which coincided with the release of his second novel, Anatomy of a Disappearance, saw him commenting on events across television and radio in the US and the UK, and writing for The New Yorker and other magazines. He was interviewed widely, and his essays and fiction have also appeared in The Guardian, The Financial Times, The New York Times, El País, La Repubblica, and several other international magazines and newspapers. His first novel, In the Country of Men, which was published in 2006, stands as perhaps the most accurate and revealing narrative assessment of the brutality of the Qaddafi regime as it affected the daily lives of Libyans. Like al-Aswani's The Yaqubian Building, which diagnosed the corruption of Hosni Mubarak's regime in Egypt, the insights and clarity of In the Country of Men have been borne out by history. A delicate masterwork of tone and control, the book was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, the Guardian's First Book Award, and the National Book Critics Circle Award in the United States. It won 6 international literary awards, including the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best First Book Award for Europe and South Asia, the Royal Society of Literature's Anjate Prize, and the inaugural Arab American Book Award. It has been translated into 26 languages. Mr. Matar's second novel again engages the tragic themes of the missing father and the pain of not knowing what has become of him. Samantha Chang calls Mr. Matar a rare artist who is able to draw pathos from his private history while crafting a story that is specifically not documentarian or autobiographical. Indeed, he once explained that he views the imagination as distinct from the realm of the personal, from what happens to him. And in the careful composition of Anatomy of a Disappearance, which works like a piece of chamber music, he introduces us to the silence at the core of his characters' lives with such elegance that we hear the silence at the core of our own lives. What a gift it is to have Hisham Matar with us here tonight. Please join me in welcoming him.
Hello. There are times when my father's absence is as heavy as a child sitting on my chest. Other times I can barely recall the exact features of his face and must bring out the photographs I keep in an old envelope in the drawer of my bedside table. There has not been a day since his sudden and mysterious vanishing that I have not been searching for him, looking in the most unlikely places. Everything and everyone, existence itself, has become an evocation, a possibility for resemblance. Perhaps this is what is meant by that brief and now almost archaic word, elegy. I do not see him in the mirror, but feel him adjusting, as if he were twisting within a shirt that nearly fits. My father has always been intimately mysterious, even when he was present. I can almost imagine how it might have been coming to him as an equal, as a friend, but not quite. My father disappeared in 1972 at the beginning of my school Christmas holiday when I was 14. Muna and I were staying at the Montreux Palace, taking breakfast, I with my large glass of bright orange juice, and she with her steaming black tea, on the terrace overlooking the steel blue surface of Lake Geneva, at the other end of which, beyond the hills and the bending waters, lay the now vacant city of Geneva. I was watching the silent paragliders hover above the still lake, and she was paging through La Tribune de Genève when suddenly her hand rose to her mouth and trembled. A few minutes later, we were aboard a train, hardly speaking, passing the newspaper back and forth. We collected from the police station the few belongings that were left on the bedside table. When I unsealed the small plastic bag, along with the tobacco and the lighter flint, I smelled him. That same watch is now wrapped round my wrist, and even today, after all these years, when I pressed the underside of the leather strap against my nostrils, I could detect a whiff of him. I wonder now how different my story would have been were Muna's hands unbeautiful, her fingertips coarse. I still, all of these years later, hear the same childish persistence. I saw her first, which bounced like a devil on my tongue whenever I caught one of Father's claiming gestures, his fingers sinking into her hair, his hand landing on her skirted thigh with the absent-mindedness of a man touching his earlobe in mid-sentence. He had taken to the Western habit of holding hands, kissing, embracing in public, but he could not fool me. Like a bad actor, he seemed unsure of his steps. Whenever he would catch me watching him, he would look away, and I swear I could see color in his cheeks. A dark tenderness rises in me now as I think how hard he had tried, how I yearn still for an easy sympathy with my father. Our relationship lacked what I have always believed possible, given time, and perhaps after I had become a man, after he had seen me become a father, a kind of emotional eloquence and ease. But now the distances that had then governed our interactions and cut a quiet gap between us continue to shape him in my thoughts. We met Muna at the Magda Marina, a small hotel in Alexandria's Agami beach. Although the sea was nearby, we did not swim in it, and I never asked to build sandcastles. Most of the guests, too, ignored it and were content with the shelter and limited pleasures of the swimming pool. The concrete box structures of the single-story rooms screened us from the surrounding landscape. You could hear the waves lapping lazily against the shore like a snoring guard dog, but we caught only narrow glimpses of the blueness. Father had been bringing me here for the past 2 summers, ever since Mother's sudden passing. We never came to places such as the Magda Marina when my mother was alive. She did not like the heat, I never saw her in a swimsuit or in sudden surrender, closing her eyes at the sun. The coming of Cairene spring would set her off planning our summer getaways. Once we summered high up in the Swiss Alps, where my body stiffened at the sight of deep, hollow chasms emptied out of the rocky earth. Another time she took us to Nordland in northern Norway, where austere black mountains reflected sharply their splintered peaks on the unmoving waters. We stayed in a wooden cabin that stood alone by the water and was painted the brown red of withered leaves. Round its roof hung a gutter as wide as a human thigh. Here, whatever fell from the sky fell in abundance. There was no other man-made structure in sight. Some afternoons mother disappeared, and I would not let on to father that my heart was thumping at the base of my ears. I would keep to my room until I heard footsteps on the deck, then the kitchen door slide open. Once I found her there with hands stained black-red, a rough globe dyed into the front of her sweater, with eyes as clean as glass, wide, satisfied. She held out a handful of wild berries. They tasted of a ripe sweetness I found hard to attribute to that landscape. One night fog gathered thickly, abstracting the licks and sighs of the northern lights. You need adulthood to appreciate such horror. An anxious heat entered my 8-year-old mind, and I curled up in bed, trying to muffle the crying, hoping mother would pay me one of her night visits, kiss my forehead, lie beside me. In the morning the still world returned, the innocent waters, the ferocious mountains, the pale sky dotted with small, newborn clouds. I found her in the kitchen warming milk, a glass of water standing on the white marble counter beside her. Not juice, tea, coffee, but water was her morning drink. She took a sip, and with her usual insistence on soundlessness, muffled the impact with the soft tip of her little finger. Any sudden sound unsettled her. She could conduct an entire day's chores in near silence. I sat at the rented table where, when the three of us gathered at meal times, mother would occasionally glance at the fourth empty chair as if it signaled an absence, something lost. She poured the hot milk, a sliver of steam brushed the air, then disappeared beside her neck. "Why the long face?" she said. She took me out onto the deck that stretched above the lake. The air was so brisk it stung my throat. We stood in silence. I remembered what she had said to father in the car when the naked mountains of Nordland first came into view. Here God decided to be a sculptor. Everywhere else he holds back. Holds back, father had echoed. You talk about him as if he's a friend of yours. In those days, father did not believe in God. He often greeted mother's remembrances of the divine with irritated sarcasm. Perhaps I should not have been surprised when, after mother died, he would now and again voice a prayer. Sarcasm, more often than not, hides a secret fascination. Was it the romance of wood fires, the discretion of heavy coats, that attracted my mother to the north and unpeopled places of Europe? Or was it the impeccable stillness of a fortnight spent mostly sheltered indoors with the only two people she could lay claim on? I have come to think of those holidays, no matter where they were, as having taken place in a single country, her country, and the silences that marked them, her melancholy. There were moments when her unhappiness seemed as elemental as clear water. After she died, it soon became obvious that what father had always wanted to do in the 2 weeks he allowed himself off every summer was to lie in the sun all day. So the Magda Marina became the place where he and I spent that fortnight. He seemed to have lost his way with me. Widowhood had dispossessed him of any ease that he had once had around his only child. When we sat down to eat, he either read the paper or gazed into the distance. Whenever he noticed me looking at him, he would fidget or check his watch. As soon as he had finished eating, he would light a cigarette and snap his fingers for the bill, not bothering to see whether I had finished, too. "See you back in the room," he would say. He never did that when Mother was alive. Instead, when the three of us went to a restaurant, they would sit side by side facing me. If we were all engaged in some conversation, she would direct most of her contributions toward me, as if I were the front wall of a squash court. And when his unease led him to play the entertainer, she would monitor, in that discreet way of hers, my reactions to his forced cheerfulness, or, if he could bear it no longer, to his vast silences. With Mother's eyes on me, I would watch Father, observe the other patrons, or stare out at the view, which was often of some unremarkable street or square. No doubt daydreaming or plotting his next move in the secret work I never once heard him talk about. At these moments, it felt as if he were the boy obliged to pass a meal with adults, that he was the son and I the father. After she passed away, he and I came to resemble two flat-sharing bachelors, kept together by circumstance or obligation. But then that tender-hearted sympathy, raw and sudden, would rise in him at the most unexpected moments, and he would plunge his face into my neck, sniff deeply and kiss, tickling me with his mustache. It would set us off laughing, as though everything were all right. It is true, I did see Muna first. She was sitting on the ceramic tiles that surrounded the rectangular swimming pool of the Magda Marina, looking at the underside of her foot. The tiles were decorated in a pattern that many years later, on a trip to Granada, I learned was a factory copy of a wall mosaic of the Alhambra. When I saw the original, I ran my fingers over the mosaic and let my mind return to that distant summer's day of 1971 in Alexandria when I was 12. Her hair was tied sensibly in a ponytail, and she had on an outrageously bright yellow swimsuit that made her skin seem darker, her age younger. For a moment, I thought her a girl. For a moment, the yellow strap running across her back brought to mind the yellow hospital bracelet that had been bound round my mother's wrist. The light shimmered blue and weakly off the water and onto Muna's body. "This bit of skin is Arab. This from your English mother," I would later come to tease her. She was pulling her ankle, arching her neck, the ridge of her spine pressing against the yellow strap. Thinking back on it now, I'm envious of the confidence with which I had approached her, as if I were crossing the road to the aid of a turtle on its back. Such natural self-assuredness has since eluded me. Whereas Father managed to shake off that cloak of shyness, over the years mine became only heavier. I sat cross-legged beside her on the tiles and, without asking permission, placed the complaining foot in my lap. I proceeded to inspect each toe. She did not resist. Then, embedded in the soft underside of one toe, I found it, a brown speck of a thorn fading into the pink flesh. "Last week," I told her, turning her foot in order to gain a better angle, "the same thing happened to me. It drove me crazy the whole day until I couldn't stand it any longer, and just before going to bed, I pulled it out." I captured the thorn between two fingernails. She flinched, but I did not draw back. "Just like that," I said, and held it on the tip of my forefinger to show her. Our heads were so close now that I could feel a strand of her hair touch my temple. "Thank you," she said in an angular Arabic. I could see now that her shoulders had eased. "What is your name?" It was an English accent, I was sure. She ran her hand down my cheek, then held my chin and gazed at me. She had inconstant eyes, brown, green, and silver all at once. "Nouri," I said, pulling away. "Nouri al-Alfi." "Pleasure to meet you, Nouri al-Alfi," she said, and smiled a smile I could not understand. I walked back to where father was sunbathing. Now he had his broad chest propped up on his elbows. "Who is she?" he asked, his eyes on her. I thought of running back to ask her name, but she stood up, slid 2 fingers beneath the bottom of the swimsuit, and stretched the fabric around her buttocks. The pattern of the ceramic tiles was faintly imprinted on the underside of one thigh. She turned toward us. I wondered if she was looking at me or at father, or at us both together, perhaps. Then she went to sit at a table where a glass of lemonade had been waiting. Father reclined, his elbow red with pressure, and closed his eyes. Under a perfectly cropped mustache, his lips stretched into a precise smile, knowing, ironic, as if he was satisfied at his own intelligence, at having figured out a riddle in half the time. She looked our way again, lit a cigarette, then pretended to be looking elsewhere. Finally, she closed her eyes at the sun. I watched her now without restraint. I wanted to wear her as you would a piece of clothing, to fold into her ribs, be a stone in her mouth. I made as if I were walking around the pool to watch her from all angles. Suddenly she opened her eyes, looking at me, unsurprised, unmoving. She came to the pool's edge, dipped 1 foot in the water, then the other, and tiptoed away. I watched the trail of wet prints evaporate. The glass of lemonade was still there, patient and full. One of the sweating waiters, dressed in black bow tie and waistcoat, took it away. I regretted not beating him to it. How wonderful it would have been to drink something intended for her. I found father turned on his stomach, the wood slats of the sun lounger marked red across his back. I did not see her for the rest of the day. I did not see her for the rest of the morning. And before we sat at our table to lunch, I noticed that father, too, was scanning the dining hall. I looked up from my plate every time someone walked in, and, having his back to the entrance, father glanced at my face as if it were a mirror. And at one point, he turned around to see who had come in, and I felt I had misled him. After lunch, most retreated to their rooms to escape the sun. A few Europeans remained stretched outside the shade by the pool, their skin the color of orange peel. A breeze would occasionally ruffle the pages of the books and magazines on the floor beside them, but the bodies lay shiny and still in the white heat. I took my ball to the tended lawns that snaked around the rooms. Each room was constructed in the shape of a box with the front facade in glass sliding doors, mirrored for privacy. The structures hummed with their own air conditioning, which on the outside hissed and blew hot. I felt spied upon by the guests in each room, even though I suspected they were probably dozing like father. He would lie in the curtained coolness, one ankle resting on the other, the newspaper crackling between his hands as he leaned slightly towards the lampshade. One room had its door open the width of 2 fingers. I could hear running water, an English song, and along with it a woman's voice. I drew the door wide enough to enter, but waited until my eyes adjusted to the shade. The room was an exact replica of ours, the same bed covers, the same wallpaper and furniture, except that it had one bed that was as large as our 2 single beds combined. The bathroom door had also been left ajar, the yellow swimsuit hanging from the handle. I realized then that I had been searching for her, hoping to encounter her away from my father's gaze. I felt a feverish excitement at being in her room, inside the private chamber of this mysterious woman who was traveling alone. Who was she? How did she come to speak our language? So very few non-Arabs speak Arabic that when you encounter one, it is as thrilling as spotting a friend in the audience of a vast theater just before the lights go down. And the way she moved, the way she looked at me across the pool, expressed a confidence of purpose that suggested she was not on holiday, that she had not come to just hang around. And so she immediately acquired the allure of those who, like my father, seemed to live their lives in secret. I sat at the foot of the bed, placing the ball beside me. There was a pair of shoes in front of the armchair. One shoe lay on its side, revealing the pressed and molded cream leather of the interior. On the chiffonier there was a pearl necklace, a perfume bottle, and a hairbrush. With my hand on the bathroom door handle resting on the damp swimming suit, I looked with one eye through the narrow opening. I saw her naked body fogged by the shower curtain, the triangle of black hair blurred and moving like one of those blots that appear after looking directly into the sun. I made no sound and was certain she could not see me, but suddenly she said, "Who's there?" I ran, not caring what noise I made now, as fast as I could out of the room, remembering my ball only when it was too late to return for it. As soon as father rose from his nap, I told him. My ball wandered inside one of the rooms and I didn't feel it was right to get it. So, he said, shaving. He usually shaved early evening before dinner and not in the mornings like most men. I just don't want anyone to think I was spying or anything. But I've always known you were a little spy, he said, smiling through the mirror. He brought the blade to his neck and shaved off a strip of foam in one easy stroke. In the evening, I found her standing in black dress by our table in the dining hall, talking to father, one hand on the backrest of the opposite chair, my chair. The pearls were encircling her neck. Her brushed hair fell heavy and knew exactly where, just above the cheekbones, to curve back. And as I came close, I caught the fragrance of her perfume. "Here is your little friend," my father said in English when I was close enough to hear. She held out a hand. I shook it, unable to look her in the eye. "Speak, don't be shy," father said into the awkward silence. "He attends English school," he told her. Another chair was brought, another place set, and we dined together. She did not mention a word about that afternoon, but when father went to answer a telephone call, she smiled. Earlier, there was a mouse in my room, a very large mouse. And again, with that feathery clasp, she took hold of my chin. "Tomorrow, come fetch your ball." She sipped some water, dabbed the corners of her lips with the white napkin. "Your father tells me you are 12. For some reason, I thought you were older." She was no longer speaking in Arabic, and so lacked the vulnerability I had first detected by the pool. And because it was father who had chosen to speak in English when I approached the table, I saw him as the one behind this transformation. Now I will read a passage further into the book that I hadn't intended to read until the lovely supper I had with Christopher and with James and with Tom and Danish. And there was something in that conversation, something that James had said, that made me think I should read this passage. Soon after my father disappeared, Monsieur Charlie Haas began a regular correspondence with me that was formal and disciplined, sticking to the business that bound us, my inheritance. But in one letter, about a year after my father disappeared, he veered off the usual business line and expressed a perplexing, raw feeling. The letter arrived not with the quarterly bank statement and bill of his charges, but on its own, written in a hurried, almost exasperated hand that covered both sides of an A5 notepad piece of paper with a torn, perforated edge. It started, "I have been thinking of you and of how you must be feeling. It's terrible, just terrible. Your father was an excellent man." I felt a jealous anger at his referring to my father in the past tense, as if he knew more than I did, not only about father, but also about what might have befallen him. And how can anyone expect you to know all that he was and all that he did? The people he knew, the people who loved him. But know this, he loved you very much. If you need proof, look at how thoughtfully he arranged your affairs. He ended it with, I'm sorry to be writing you like this, but I felt compelled." Then he signed his name. It was well past midnight when, a few weeks after I received the letter, Mr. Galbraith came to wake me. "Ilalfi," he whispered, his figure black against the light of the corridor. "Phone call from Geneva. Mr. Haas says he is the family lawyer, says it's very important." Father had been found, I thought. Why else would a Swiss lawyer call at this hour? I did not run, but only just managed to walk beside Mr. Galbraith. The telephone was all the way on the ground floor of the old mansion, in a musty corridor, tiled in York stone, worn to a shine and bulging out of the ground. I held the cold receiver to my ear and waited until Mr. Galbraith reached the end of the corridor. "Hello? Is this Monsieur Nouri?" "Yes?" "Oh, I'm so sorry. Did I wake you? I just wanted to make sure that you are all right. You didn't respond to my letter." I said nothing. Did anyone come to you, to see you, I mean, asking questions, hassling you?" "No. Anyone like who?" "Are you sure? You know you can tell me if they did." "Mr. Haas, I don't know what you are talking about." "In that case, very good, very good. If anything like that happens, though, call me immediately." Neither Mr. Galbraith nor the headmaster brought up the subject, and I mentioned father's disappearance to no one. It became my secret. Some nights, lying in the dark after lights out, I came close to telling Alexei, but I did not know what words to use. I did not know how to name what had taken place: kidnapping, abduction, theft. None of them seemed right, and how was I to answer the questions that would surely follow, about why and who and how, and wasn't there anything I could do? In March, 3 months after it happened, I had taken a long walk through the hills. Buds wrapped in their velvet caskets clung to the tips of branches. Everything was on the brink of change. For the first time since I had arrived at Delswick, the English sun warmed my skin. I had been wrong, I thought. I ought to have told Alexei. I pictured us walking through the grove and up the steep hill. We would sit on the craggy boulder there and look out onto the hills rolling and fading into the distance. We would spot our boarding house, small enough to hide behind a thumb. And this time we would climb here not for cigarettes and vodka, and not so that he could tell me about his life back in Germany, but to discuss a matter of the utmost importance. I could no longer wait. How ridiculous that I had left it this long, I told myself. The shock and anguish inflicted by the sudden and yet ambiguous loss of my father felt like a weight on my chest. It had never felt heavier. I wanted to roll it over onto the lap of a trusted friend who might help me make sense of it. I walked briskly back. I could not find him anywhere. Then, just when I began to wonder if this was not a sign, I found him in the common room watching the news. I sat on the far side, tempering my breath. Besides the library, this was the only room where talking was discouraged. I waited for him to look my way so that I could gesture to him to follow me. I began to take notice of the news item that was holding his attention. A mother had lost a child. He had been playing in the garden. When she looked up from the kitchen sink, he was gone. The cameraman zoomed onto her face as she tried to answer the reporter's questions. It was upsetting to witness such intrusion into another's grief. It was as if the camera took delight in the woman's shame. I wondered what Alexei made of it. "How could you lose your son?" one boy called out, and he was shushed down. Alexei continued to face the screen. "Stupid," he said softly. I was not sure if he meant the woman on the TV or the boy who had just spoken. And because no one turned to him or told him to be quiet, I convinced myself that he meant the boy. But then Alexei jutted his chin out toward the television and got up and left the room. I watched the leather seat of his armchair fill with air. Nothing would be lost, I reasoned, by holding off for a few days. I remained agitated, uncertain whether to tell him or not, and at the height of my despair, I would feel the sweat pool on my chest. One night, a storm took hold of the trees outside our dormitory window. I watched them through the glass. The helpless things swung from side to side in the electric light. The mice in the attic above scurried back and forth. The wind moaned and whistled through the window. The rain, which came and went in sheets, was like 1,000 fingernails tapping the glass. "It's nothing, go to sleep," Alexei said when he heard the floorboards squeak. The next time I woke up, the world was a calm place. The leaves had hardly a breeze to contend with now. In their stillness they looked exhausted. The trees on the outer perimeter of the grove had either collapsed or split into two. Alexei was fast asleep. He had slept through the rest of the storm. Something about that astonished me. What comfort allows such trust in the world? The stillness of that morning seemed to confirm my old instinct not to tell Alexei about my father. I made up my mind. I must keep this private. I could not bear the disquiet of another, or worse, far worse, to see him fascinated, entertained by the oddity of what had happened. What's a happy German boy with happy parents to know about this? Thank you. And I think just before any questions, I just wanted to express my gratitude to IWP, and particularly to Christopher Merrill and his colleagues, and to the wonderful Addie who's been looking after me superbly, and to everyone else really, and how delightful it is to be in this strange city, this incredibly calm, beautiful city filled with writers, and I feel that I am reading to writers, and that's just a privilege. I feel like I'm with fellow shipmates, and that's a delight. And thanks very much to this wonderful bookshop for hosting the reading. Okay, I will stop now. Of course.
I don't intend to be the first one who is talking, but while nobody raising his hand, I do. You know, whenever Garcia Marquez got the Nobel, they asked him about the most difficult thing in writing the novel itself. And immediately he say, the time.
The?
Timing. You know, there is a difference between the present time, which you are talking about, and the time of the story itself. And the way you go from time to time smoothly, guiding the reader not to be somehow say, where we are. You know, it's very clever way when you are talking about your father and then back again about the
not
gays.
my father, but the father of the
I mean the narrator, not you. Sorry. You know, so how you manage, you know, some writer, they do skeleton, 1, 2, 3, in order to go from back and forth somehow. So do you manage the way of writing the time to go from period to others? And do you go through a revision, 1, 2, 3, whatever?
Oh no, I just write it once and it all falls into.
You are lucky. So just I want to know how you think about the timing in the novel itself.
Yeah, I know. I work very slowly, and it's. I think of myself as a prose writer, in the sense that, you know, I aspire to be a novelist. I aspire to be a poet, but I am actually a prose writer in the sense that I think of language in the paragraph. I think of paragraph. I don't even think of page. Actually, I think of a paragraph, and I just what's very interesting is that once you've written enough into a certain project, the project starts to determine its own mentality, its own pace, and its own relationship to time. And then really all you have to do is listen to it. That's not easy. It's the trickiest thing, I think, is being able to listen to it and allowing it to lead, you know, to determine the ground. And that's probably the hardest thing I find, because I have a very healthy ego, which is a problem, I think, when you're trying to write like that, because your ego wants to let me show them what I can do, you know, and that's a disaster. It's the best way to kill the thing, is to want it to speak for you, to be your representative, you know. I hope that it's better than me. I hope that it's better than me. So that's so I just try to listen. I mean, it makes it sound simple, but that takes a while. You know, it takes a while. Listening takes a while, and at times it seems that there's nothing there to listen to. You know, it seems very upsetting. But eventually it starts to dictate things. It starts to dominate the process, and that's the best moment, when that starts to happen. Sometimes it happens very early on. You know, the sound and the mentality of the prose is immediate from the first sentence, And sometimes it just takes a while, and sometimes it happens early on and you recognize it, and then you stop recognizing it. You can't see it. It's like a dream. You think, you start to doubt it. No, it wasn't like that. It was, you lose your ear, and then your ear comes back, and that's really the best way I can describe it, I think. Yeah.
Hisham, I know you've had a long day, and this is actually an extra literary question, so if you don't want to deal with it, just say so. Chris Stevens wasn't a personal friend of mine, but he was a friend to lots and lots of people, and one of my best friends from junior high school was actually one of his best friends, and they worked together at Tel Aviv, at the embassy. So the shock at his death here, for a number of us, was really quite radical. And then I heard that you were coming, and what I think a lot of us have been thinking over the past 10 days is that the increasing mechanization and barbarization of warfare and the first choice of technological weapons as opposed to diplomacy has really made the whole practice of diplomacy far more dangerous and possibly less effective. And I thought you might have a unique perspective on that. I don't know if you see a continuum, if it hasn't really changed that much since your father was taken, or whether you see something darker emerging. And I'd like to hear what you think, if you feel like it.
I really don't know what to say, apart from the obvious things, such as that, it's really deeply regrettable that this happened. That he was an individual that was liked in Libya and by many Libyans. And believe me, it's not usual for a diplomat, particularly an American diplomat, to be so popular anywhere in the Middle East. And he was one of those. He was I don't know him, but I didn't know him, but he seemed to have been a deeply sincere, interesting human being. The other obvious thing to say is that what happened to him has been happening to a lot of other people before, so it's part of a wider picture, and it's a picture, sadly, that is not interesting until somebody like him is killed, and that, I think, should invite us to revisit how we see these things. America's closest allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, have been funding heavily the sort of groups that I think have done this and have did other things before them. And it seems that there is a pattern of these groups being, growing in confidence and in strength. No, apart from that, I don't know what to say. As a Libyan, I don't feel they're certainly representative, and the response, the spontaneous civic response in Libya, I think, is a testimony to that. The demonstrations and that came out immediately after this tragedy. So, yeah.
Hi. Hello.
Sorry.
Oh, hi.
Oh, hi.
I think often in reminiscing about people lost, especially in the memories of childhood, there could be like the light can be like golden hue toned because there's something cherished there almost so far back. So I was wondering if that light was something in the writing that you worked through, or in the writing what there was in the discovery of returning to the memories.
Well, the book is not a memory. These things didn't happen to me. What I was doing is I was I think doing what most writers of fiction do, is that I was lending some of my obsessions to these fictional characters and landing them into made-up situations that engage me as a writer, both in the two things I'm interested in, in ideas and pleasure, and philosophy and poetry. Those two things are somehow at play in the text. And I've given Nouri some of my grief and other things, but he's a very different person from me. So I don't feel at all that I'm recalling a particular thing that happened to me at all. And the places that the thing takes place are, some of them are places that I've made up totally. And that's I suppose it takes a while for the imagination to take something. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that the relationship between the personal experience and a creative work is an incredibly complicated one, and one I think worthy of thinking about and navigating. But I know what it isn't, and it isn't this direct channel. It is a bit like what Tayyib Saleh said about what allegory is. Allegory should be buried so deep that it's like a jewel at the bottom of the sea, and the reflections, the way the light reflects of it, abstract it in a sense. And so I quite like that, in the sense that you, as a writer, arguably anything you write, even if you're writing a science fiction book, you're writing about personal obsessions. In my case, it seems that the connection is very strong, because I am writing about a man who loses his father. So therefore, it's got to be me, right? But in many ways, I am exactly like a writer who's writing a science fiction book. I am taking some of my obsessions and exercising them. Not to the motive is never to resolve them, or to gain, some sort of command over them. I don't at all feel that I've somehow resolved something having written this book. Not at all. The intention is difficult to talk about, but it's somewhere near the territory of using your assets to think, to dance, to sing, to ruminate, meditate over things. That sometimes there is incredible fruit even in dispossession. That you learn something, and I figured that out. I've learned something through this act of dispossession, and it feels like a possession, in a sense. I feel like I've gained something from it, and how interesting it would be to take this something that was designed to silence someone and make something of it, create something of it, because I think embedded in these acts is a desire to retard you. To retard the artist, to retard the individual, and to retard society. That's one of the intentions, I think, when you steal someone. That's one of the things you're trying to do. So I thought, as an artist, how interesting it would be to take this and to, I don't even think of it as an act of resistance. I said that, I think, in an interview that's even published in the book. I disown everything I've said, including what I'm saying now. I don't. But I think in hindsight resistance is the wrong term. But in a sense, I will sing even about these things. I will find a way to make pleasure and ideas and art out of whatever you give me. So a kind of there's a bit of the kind of cocky young man's defiance. Fine, okay. There's a bit of that, but it's not quite resistance. Although I have to always stress the fact that when I'm writing, I don't think about these things at all. When I'm writing, I don't. I would have never described it this way. This is not the writer speaking. Yeah? This is the person who now finds himself in the position of the writer, who you've invited very kindly and generously to talk about his work. But what is happening is that he's no longer the writer. He's now some sort of, presenter, a performer, a guest. He tries not to be too heavy. He tries not to be rude. He wants to he wants to be sporting. You know, he wants to play the game, and he's not even actually trying to sell his book. So he's kind of hopeless. He's sort of a hopeless creature. But what's interesting is that the sense that he's trying to make of the book, the words that he gives to it, the descriptions that he gives to it, weren't the concern of the writer. The writer was concerned with very simple things. And when I'm writing, my concerns are incredibly basic. You know, I want to sleep well because I want to be good in the morning. You know, I don't want to eat a heavy meal at night. I don't want to drink too much. People that are aggressive, I don't want to see them. People who are not gentle with me, I don't want to see. In fact, it's better if I see very few people. I don't want to. I want to go. Everything I do, I want it to be to help me do this thing. And I sit in the morning, and I'm not even thinking about my work when I'm not working. Thinking is in fact very bad for writing, I think, in my experience. Like, really, I'm really being serious in the sense that you know, when I have a problem, you know, many problems. This work involves a lot of challenges and puzzles that you're trying to resolve, the issues to do with time and how to structure the book, and lots of little details. And sometimes I think, well, okay, and this is really troubling me, and I'm going to go for a walk and think about it. You know, it's a complete waste of time. Really, complete waste of. It's better to go on a walk and not think about it. It's better to do something other. You know, to me, it's just, you know, it's all about how to circumstantially make this moment in the morning when I sit and work as fruitful as possible, and. That's what I'm thinking about. I'm not consciously how this is about this, and there is this reference to this mythology, or it's about how do I take this dark thing and make something beautiful. I don't think about that at all. So, I mean, that would be ridiculous. You know, I just sit and think about the sentence and what the next sentence might be. Oh, how interesting this opportunity and these characters. What are the possibilities here? What am I? You know, and paradoxically, it comes out as if there is some sort of intelligence around it, although it doesn't feel that way in the doing, no? And now I've spilled the beans.
We can continue our discussion informally, but we've run out of time, so let's thank our author, Hisham Matar.
Thank you.
He'll be happy to sign copies of his books for you.
It was just fabulous. Yeah.